They aren't ignoring you because they need space. They're ignoring you because it works. The silent treatment is not a mood, not immaturity, not conflict avoidance. When it happens repeatedly, strategically, and in response to your attempts to connect, it is a control mechanism. And the first step to breaking the cycle is understanding exactly how the mechanism operates. Healthy space sounds like, "I need some time to think. I'll talk to you tomorrow." The silent treatment sounds like nothing, because that's the point. The key distinction is consent and communication. Choosing to withdraw without explanation for an indefinite period in direct response to your attempt to connect. That is not processing. That is punishment. Here is how the silent treatment works as a control mechanism. You say or do something they dislike, or simply fail to do what they want. They withdraw completely. No explanation, no timeline. Your anxiety rises. You begin to wonder what you did. The silence creates emotional pressure that builds until you take some action to end it, usually an apology, a capitulation, or a promise. The silence lifts. The behavior is reinforced. In 2003, Naomi Eisenberger and colleagues published a landmark study showing that social exclusion activates the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, the same brain region that processes physical pain. Being ignored does not feel like emotional discomfort. It registers neurologically as pain. Manipulators who deploy the silent treatment are not being cold. They are inflicting something that your brain classifies in the same category as a physical blow. The dorsal anterior cingulate cortex responds to disconnection as a threat signal. This is not a flaw. It evolved to motivate reconnection in social species. Isolation from the group meant death. Your brain treats sudden social exclusion as an emergency requiring immediate resolution. The silent treatment exploits this ancient circuitry. The pain you feel is real. The urgency is manufactured. The resolution being demanded is compliance. The silence is the message. It says, "Engage with me on my terms or receive nothing." It says, "Your discomfort is within my control." It says, "Compliance ends the pain." Every second of silence is a demonstration of power. The power to withdraw the emotional connection you need and to restore it only when you have produced the desired behavior. This is not conflict. This is behavioral conditioning. While the silence continues, your nervous system is in a state of anticipatory anxiety. You check your phone. You replay the last conversation. You draft apologies you're not sure you owe. You imagine reconciliation. You imagine the worst. This loop is not incidental. It is the mechanism. The anxiety is what produces the compliance. The silence doesn't need to communicate anything because your own mind fills the silence with everything they need it to contain. The most reliable effect of the silent treatment is self-blame. Because you receive no explanation, your brain generates one. And because you are the only variable you have access to, the explanation centers you. What did I do? What did I say? What do I need to fix? This self-interrogation is exactly what the silent treatment is designed to produce. The target takes responsibility for a dynamic that was imposed on them. When the silence ends, it is rarely with an honest conversation about what just happened. More commonly, it ends with warmth flooding back as though nothing occurred. And if you raise the silent treatment itself, the reframe arrives. "I just needed space." "You're being oversensitive." "I wasn't ignoring you. I was dealing with things." The silence gets re-narrated as a reasonable response, and your experience of it as painful gets repositioned as your overreaction. One instance of withdrawal could be space. Two instances with a similar trigger begins to suggest a pattern. 3 or more instances, escalating in duration, deployed in response to specific behaviors. That is a pattern, and a pattern with intent. Frequency is the diagnostic. When you find yourself adjusting your behavior to avoid triggering the silence, when you preemptively apologize for things you haven't done yet, the pattern has already shaped you. A documented feature of punitive silent treatment is duration escalation. Each cycle tends to last longer than the previous one. The first silence lasts a day, the second lasts 3 days, the fifth lasts 2 weeks. This escalation is the lever being turned. It tests how much you can tolerate, and each cycle conditions you to a new baseline of what you'll accept in order to restore connection. Duration is data. A sophisticated version of the silent treatment includes partial acknowledgement, a brief reply, a short text, a moment of eye contact, before withdrawing again. This breadcrumb maintains just enough hope to prevent you from fully disengaging. It resets the anxiety clock. It demonstrates continued control. They can give you just enough to keep you attached and not enough to resolve anything. The breadcrumb is not a sign the silence is ending. It is a demonstration that it continues on their terms. When children are present, the silent treatment sometimes operates through them. Communication happens via the children rather than directly. Instructions, information, logistics, all routed through people too young to understand what's happening to them. The children become both proxies for communication and witnesses to the dynamic. This is a specific form of using children as leverage, and its impact on the children is independent of and additional to its impact on the target. The silent treatment occasionally has an audience: family events, shared social circles, workplaces. Public silence is the silent treatment with a performance dimension. Others observe the withdrawal and form impressions. The target must manage their own distress while also managing what the silence communicates to observers. Public silence is simultaneous punishment and reputation management, because however distressed the target appears, the person delivering the silence appears composed and uninvolved. Silent treatment in professional settings is a documented workplace behavior, often classified as workplace bullying when deployed systematically. A manager who withholds information, a colleague who excludes from communication, a team that collectively withdraws, all produce the same neurological effect as interpersonal silent treatment. The professional context does not neutralize the pain. It adds the dimension of career impact to the psychological impact. In relationships with narcissistic dynamics, the silent treatment serves a secondary function beyond compliance production. It generates supply. Your distress, your searching, your reaching out, your apologies, your attempts to restore the connection, is attention. Attention of any kind, including anxious or pained attention, feeds the dynamic. The silent treatment produces the most intense form of your attention without requiring any reciprocal investment. It is supply extraction through absence. The emotion beneath the silent treatment is rarely anger. Anger wants engagement. It wants to be heard, responded to, resolved. The emotion beneath chronic silent treatment is contempt. Contempt does not want engagement. It expresses that you are beneath the effort of engagement. John Gottman's research identifies contempt as the single strongest predictor of relationship breakdown. More predictive than conflict frequency, more predictive than anger, more predictive than disagreement. Contempt communicates, "You do not merit my direct attention." The end of the silence, the hoover, is typically as sudden as the beginning. Warmth returns. Sometimes affection, sometimes normalcy, sometimes a grand gesture. The relief you feel is immediate and intense because the pain was intense. That relief is the reward the cycle is built around. Your nervous system associates the person with both the deepest pain and the most immediate relief, which is precisely the neurochemical structure of trauma bonding. The Hoover is not reconciliation. It is the reset of the cycle. Here is the complete cycle: connection, then a trigger, real or manufactured, then silence, then escalating anxiety and compliance behavior, then the Hoover, then a brief period of warmth and relief, then the next trigger. Each complete cycle tightens the structure. You become more attuned to potential triggers, more vigilant about your own behavior, more flooded with relief when the silence ends, which makes the next silence more powerful. The cycle is self-reinforcing by design. The most common response to silent treatment, chasing, apologizing, pleading, increasing communication attempts, is also the most reinforcing. Every message sent during the silence, every apology offered without a genuine violation, every escalation of your reaching out demonstrates that the silence is working. It confirms that withdrawal produces the desired response. The hardest, most counterintuitive, and most effective thing you can do during a silent treatment is to stop performing distress for an audience that is watching for exactly that. The gray rock method applied to silent treatment. You become as uninteresting and unrewarding as a gray rock. You do not chase. You do not apologize for things you haven't done. You do not escalate your attempts to communicate. When communication does occur, you are neutral, factual, and unrevealing of emotional state. You continue your life. The absence of anxious attention removes the reward structure. Gray rock does not end the relationship, but it changes what the silence produces. When the silence ends, not during it, because they will not receive it, you name what happened clearly and without aggression. When you go silent without explanation in response to something I've said, I experience that as punishment. I want to understand what happened, but I need us to be able to talk about it directly. This is not accusation. It is a clear statement of your experience and a request for a different pattern. Watch what happens next. The response tells you more than the silence did. Before the next silence begins, not during it, establish your consequent statement. If we reach a point where you need space and stop communicating, I'll give you that space, and I'll also use that time to take care of myself rather than wait. I won't chase. This is a boundary with a consequence attached. It changes the reward structure before the silence deploys. They know in advance that the silence will not produce the anxious pursuit they're accustomed to receiving. The single most impactful behavioral change you can make in response to silent treatment is to stop chasing. Not as a game or a counter tactic, but as a genuine decision that your peace is not contingent on their timeline. When you stop chasing, two things happen. First, the reward structure of the silence collapses. Second, you find out very quickly how much of the connection depended on your pursuit rather than on mutual investment. Both outcomes are information. While the silence continues, your nervous system needs to be regulated through means that don't involve the person deploying the silence. Reach out to safe relationships, move your body, maintain your routines. Journal the pattern, not your feelings about them specifically, but the objective sequence. What happened, when the silence started, what you did, how long it lasted, how it ended. Physical movement directly reduces cortisol. Routine reduces the existential uncertainty that the silence creates. You can survive the silence. Your body is designed for it. If the silent treatment is part of a pattern of controlling behavior, documentation matters. Date and duration of each episode. What preceded it? What ended it? What behavior was produced? This documentation does two things. First, it creates an objective record that counters the gaslighting that will accompany the post-silence reframe. Second, it externalizes the pattern, which makes it visible to you in a way that ongoing immersion in the dynamic prevents. The pattern on paper is harder to minimize than the pattern in memory. Systematic silent treatment, deployed repeatedly for escalating durations as a response to non-compliance, alongside other controlling behaviors, is a component of coercive control. In the UK, coercive control is a criminal offense. Documentation of silent treatment patterns, particularly alongside financial control, isolation, and monitoring, contributes to the evidence base for coercive control cases. If this description matches your situation, speak with a specialist domestic abuse organization before making any moves. Children who regularly witness one parent deploying silent treatment against another learn several things. That emotional withdrawal is an appropriate response to conflict. That silence is a source of power. That love is conditional on compliance. And that their home environment is emotionally unsafe. These are not abstract concerns. They are documented developmental impacts. A child growing up inside the silence cycle is not unaffected by it simply because it is not directed at them. They are inside the atmosphere it creates. Recovery from years of silent treatment often requires more than recognizing the pattern. The self-blame, the hypervigilance, the physical pain responses, the anticipatory anxiety. These are trauma responses that have been conditioned over time. A therapist familiar with emotional abuse, coercive control, and relational trauma can help you decondition these responses in a way that self-awareness alone cannot fully accomplish. The work is not about the other person. It is about restoring your nervous system to a preconditioned baseline. What does recovery from chronic silent treatment look like? It looks like noticing that you no longer pre-apologize for things you haven't done. It looks like being able to tolerate silence without it triggering an emergency response. It looks like trusting that someone's temporary withdrawal is not the end of something, and knowing the difference between that and punitive silence. Recovery is the slow recalibration of your threat response to silence, from emergency to neutral. It takes time. It happens. Sometimes the silence tells you everything you need to know, not about what you did wrong, but about what the relationship is. If someone's repeated response to your needs, your limits, or your attempts to communicate is to withdraw, that is a complete answer about whether your needs, limits, and communication are valued. You do not need to decode it further. You do not need a different conversation to understand it. The silence, delivered repeatedly, has already communicated the most important thing. If this episode helped you name something you've been living inside, share it with someone who needs to hear it. The silent treatment is one of the least discussed forms of emotional abuse, partly because it leaves no visible evidence. Understanding it is how you stop it from working. Subscribe for weekly psychological self-defense content. And remember, their silence is not your verdict. Renaktuan auto vo PY, ila P9, scripts, deception circuit, epzauino. View scripts.txt, channel, DC.